Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to my live today. So what is the immigration subject for today? Well, today I'd like to talk about criminal waivers. And again, go ahead and ask your questions and I will scroll back and get back to them after I talk about criminal waivers. But I think it's an important subject for people to know because I have a lot of clients that have committed crimes, that have been indicted, that have been arrested. And if any of that occurs to somebody who's not a U.S. citizen, you need to be worried, okay? So the first things first, if you're in a criminal proceeding, and you know, by the way, 95% of people in criminal proceedings plead guilty to something. So if you're in a criminal proceeding and the criminal attorney says, I've got a great deal for you, blah, 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 you need to do this, sign here, and you'll be, everything will be hunky-dory. Do not do that, okay? You need to contact an immigration attorney to advise and work with the criminal attorney so that you do not plead to something that will either end you up in deportation removal proceedings, or will, you can try to minimize the issue that will happen. So make sure that you do that, okay? So this live is for people who already have convictions, okay? And what happens when you already have a conviction and you want to, for example, do a marriage petition, you want to do a, employment petition, you want to get the green card. How do criminal waivers work? Okay, what does it mean? So just because you have a crime in the past, even if it's 20 years ago, okay, you could have been dumb and young and done something stupid and, turned your life around and whatever, but that crime is still going to affect your immigration status. So let's use the example that you're married, okay? You're married to a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident, and you want to adjust status and become a lawful permanent resident, okay? So what do you do? All right. Well, you can't just, apply for the green card and forget about the crime. You can't not list the crime because then they're going to put you under another ground of inadmissibility, which is fraud. Okay. So you don't want that to happen. So you have to list the crime. So first, what has to happen is you have to analyze. And when I say probably your immigration attorney, has to analyze whether the crime makes you inadmissible in the first place. Okay, not all crimes make you inadmissible. A lot do, a ton do, and some are on the gray line. And if they're on the gray, meaning that it's a little unclear if it does or it doesn't, then you have to move to the next step. So if it clearly, after you analyze, shows that the crime is not a problem, doesn't make you inadmissible, well, then no problem, right? You have nothing to worry about. But I'm telling you right now, if you go to the interview and the officer starts asking you about it, it could become an issue, which is why you should have an attorney with you at the interview so that if it becomes an issue, the attorney can cite the law and the regs and the cases as to why you are not inadmissible. Now, let's go to the next step. Let's say that the crime does make you inadmissible, okay? So then we have to analyze that whether or not that crime makes you inadmissible, whether there's a waiver of it, okay? So first of all, what is a waiver? Okay, a waiver, basically, it's, when we put it together, it's declaration, affidavits, legal brief, evidence, all kinds of stuff, which basically says, the bottom line is it says, I'm sorry for what I did, but under this law, this particular person's going to suffer if I'm not allowed to get the green card. So please, you, immigration, forget about the crime and let me in. Okay, that's the bottom line of a waiver. Now, obviously, it's more complicated and detailed to prepare, but that's what it ends up doing. Okay, a waiver is very important. And why do waivers exist in the first place? They exist because when they were making the laws, they said, okay, we're not going to make it so that everybody who's inadmissible is inadmissible forever. Okay, we're going to give them a chance. We're going to allow them to apply for a waiver to get over the crime and to be able to become a lawful permanent resident. So when I do the waivers, of course, we statutorily show you qualify and you have the qualifying relative, and we try to show all the hardship and everything that will happen with that. But it's really a scale. Okay, you have the bad stuff on one side, which we try to minimize, and of course that's the crime. Bad stuff's the crime. And then we have the good stuff on the other side. And that's where we try to maximize it. We try to show rehabilitation, the U.S. citizen, lawful permanent resident family in the U.S., the ties in the U.S., the volunteering you've done, the good moral character. There's all kinds of stuff we can show in a waiver to try to convince the officer to grant the waiver, okay? Because the bottom line is, if you're inadmissible because of a crime, the door to immigration is closed. Okay, it doesn't matter if you have 12 U.S. citizen children and been married for 32 years. The door is closed. The waiver opens the door, okay? Now, I've had people in the past who fill out one single form and say, my husband will suffer if I don't come back. And they think that that's sufficient, which it's not. And they find out, that the reason I know this is they come to me with a denied waiver and they go, what can I do? Okay. So the waiver is much more than that. It's a purely discretionary decision. The officer does not have to say yes, okay? You have to convince the officer, and you have to understand that when you walk in the door and you submit the waiver, the officer at the beginning, the answer is no, okay? That's the beginning. That's the mindset of the officer. They're not going to grant it, okay? So you have to convince the officer otherwise. And of course, that's what my office does. Okay, we put all the evidence in to convince the officer why the waiver should be granted. So in effect, using my example of the marriage petition, that in effect is the most important part of the whole petition, which is the waiver. Because like I said, the door doesn't open until the waiver's approved. Okay, so you can't just play around with the waiver and say, well, if they don't grant it, then I'll hire a lawyer or whatever. You could do things that might not be reversed. So you want to be in a position that when you submit the waiver, you do it in the strongest possible manner. Okay? And like I said, sometimes crimes fall on the gray area, right? So when I do a criminal waiver that's in the gray area, my first argument is this person doesn't need the waiver because of this, and this. Okay, and I cite the law and the argument. And then I go on and say, but if you, the officer, disagree with me and feel that a waiver is needed, here's why the waiver should be granted. Okay, so the first part's the waiver is arguing why they don't need the waiver. And then the rest of it is trying to, if they disagree, trying to show why the waiver should be granted. Okay, so that in a nutshell is what a criminal waiver is. And just so you know, there's not only criminal waivers, there's medical waivers, there's financial waivers, there's fraud waivers, there's all kinds of waivers. Okay, so just because you might have committed something in the past or have some issue in the past doesn't mean you can't get over it, okay? So let me scroll back here, see if we have any questions. Today's going to be a relatively short live because I've got to go to court after. But let's see, just a minute. Sorry, it takes me a while to scroll through all the stuff here. By the way, don't forget the Biden administrative ruling is in effect, and if you qualify or think you qualify, you should get it prepared and ready to rock and roll and go. Okay, well, what I'm going to do is finish up my live for today on criminal waivers. And if any of you have, want a consult, just contact me through the normal means. But let me just answer this question here. Just a second. When filing the divorce waiver, are bona fide documents and divorce decree sufficient? The answer is no. Okay, that is the basis of the waiver. Okay, so a divorce waiver, just so people know, you have the 2-year conditional green card. You got divorced after you got the 2-year conditional green card. Now comes time for you to get the permanent green card. You've gotten divorced, and you have to try to show why the divorce waiver should be granted. So, first of all, the bona fide documents show that the marriage was real. Okay, that it and by real I mean for love. Okay, and that you didn't get married just to get the green card. So obviously, if you knew the person for 3 days before you got married, or the person's 60 years older than you, or you never lived together, all things like that, then it's going to be more difficult to win. So when you're showing the bona fide documents, of course, you're showing everything you can to show that before you got married, that everything was real as to why you got married, why it was for love, and why it wasn't just for the green card. You obviously have to show the divorce decree, because you can't do a divorce waiver without the divorce decree. But then you also have to show everything of how you lived when you were married, to show that it was a real marriage as well. Okay, so remember, the bona fides show everything before you were married. Okay, what you have to also show is that after you were married, show you lived together, you had joint documents, you went places together, you have, joint insurance, maybe joint whatever it is, auto policies, whatever it is, you have to show all of that. Then whenever I do the divorce waiver, I also submit a very detailed declaration to show why you're getting divorced. Okay, you can't just say, irreconcilable differences. That doesn't say anything. So you have to show why the divorce is occurring. You can show the bona fide documents, you can show the divorce decree, you can show that everything was legitimate and so forth. But then you can show, maybe your spouse cheated on you and, decided that they were going to be with that person. Maybe your spouse showed that he or she was a homosexual, and they were no longer in love with you. Whatever it is, you have to show in detail why you got divorced and how that had nothing to do with the green card. Okay, so you have to show all of that in order for the divorce waiver to sufficiently go through. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. All right. Well, anyways, everybody, send you love, give me a heart. All right. And I will be on again shortly with another live. Hopefully you learned something about criminal waivers, what to do, how to do it, more or less. And then we'll go from there. All right. Well, everybody, you have yourselves a good day. Just like let me just make sure that I got the big messages here. I don't want to leave anybody hanging. And if I do, I'll get back with you. But let me just make sure. 1 second. I'm going to have to call TikTok, say, how can I just press a button and show all the questions without having to scroll through everything? Because I think that would be really efficient. Okay, I think we're good. All right, everybody have a good day.